She had $11 in her pocket and a ring in her fist worth more than everything she'd owned in her whole life, and Olivia Bennett was walking toward the one place everyone told her would get her killed. Turn back, a voice inside her begged. Sell it, eat, survive. But she kept walking straight up to the clubhouse of the Hells Angels, straight up to a man with a skull on every knuckle, and she held out that gold ring and said, "I think this belongs to you." His face went white, not with anger, with something no one had ever seen on Jackson Carter before. If you're watching this, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Stay with me all the way to the end, because this story turns in ways you will not believe. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see just how far Olivia's story has traveled tonight. Now let's begin. The wind came off the Nevada flatland like it had something to prove, and Olivia Bennett pulled her jacket tighter and kept her eyes on the dirt. That was the thing about being poor and alone in a place like this. You learn to watch the ground, not the ski, not the horizon, not the future, the ground. Because the ground was where you found the things other people dropped and forgot. A quarter, a half-empty water bottle, a crushed pack of cigarettes with 2 good ones still inside. The ground was honest. The ground never lied to you the way people did. She was 23 years old, and she had learned more about people in the last 11 months than she had in the first 22 years combined. None of it was good. "You'll be fine," her mother used to say, back when her mother still said things. "You've always landed on your feet, Livy." Olivia hadn't landed on her feet. She had landed on the shoulder of a highway that didn't even have a name anymore, with a backpack, a busted phone, and $11 folded so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. She crouched near a rusted guardrail and dug her fingers into the dirt, out of habit more than hope. And that was when she felt it. Cold, heavier than a rock, round. She almost threw it back. She almost didn't even look. But something made her rub the dust off with her thumb, and when the metal caught the light, her whole body went still. Gold. Real gold, heavy in a way that fake gold never was. She knew the difference now. Hunger teaches you a lot of things. Her heart started going before her brain caught up. "This is it," the hunger whispered. "This is the one. This is food for a month. This is a room with a door that locks. This is a start." So she turned it over in her fingers, and the design stopped her cold. A skull, carved into the top of the ring, detailed deliberate staring up at her with hollow eyes. And around the band, 2 words she recognized instantly, 2 words that made the hair on her arms stand straight up even in the heat. Hell's Angels. Olivia dropped it. She actually dropped it right back into the dirt and stared at it like it might come alive. "No," she said out loud to no one. "No, no, no." She knew what those words meant. Everybody knew what those words meant. She'd grown up hearing the stories, the outlaws, the leather, the violence, the men you did not look at twice if you knew what was good for you. She had once watched a grown man cross to the other side of a gas station just because a motorcycle pulled in. And now she was holding their gold in the middle of nowhere. She should have walked away. Any sane person would have walked away. Instead, slowly she picked it back up, because she'd noticed something else. Something engraved on the inside of the band, small, worn, almost tender, in how carefully it had been cut. A name, J. Carter. And Olivia Bennett, homeless, hungry, $11 to her name, sat down in the dirt beside a dead highway and did the last thing in the world that made any sense. She started to think about the person who'd lost it. "You're insane." The man behind the counter of the little roadside diner said it flat like a fact, like he was telling her the coffee was $2. Olivia had walked 6 miles to get there. Her feet were screaming. She'd used one of her $11 on the coffee just so she'd have a reason to sit down, and now she was sliding the ring across the counter for him to look at. "I'm not insane," she said. "I just want to know if you recognize the name." He didn't touch it. That was the first thing she noticed. A rare ring like that, gold heavy, and the man wouldn't put a finger on it. He leaned back like it might bite. "That's Hell's Angels," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" "I can read." "Then you know you take that thing and you put it somewhere nobody ever finds it, and you forget you ever saw it." He glanced toward the door like the club might already be watching. "Girl, listen to me. People who go looking for the owner of a ring like that, sometimes they don't come back looking like they used to." Olivia wrapped her hand around the ring. "Somebody lost it," she said. Somebody dangerous lost it. Dangerous or not. She stood up, left the coffee half finished because she'd made her decision and there was no point sitting anymore. It's not mine. The man shook his head slowly. You could sell that. You look like you need to sell that. I do need to sell that. She almost laughed at how true it was. That's exactly why I'm not going to. She was halfway to the door when he called after her. Carter? She stopped. The name, Jay Carter. The man's jaw worked like he was already regretting it. There's a Carter runs the chapter 2 towns over. Jackson Carter. Been around forever. He pointed at her hard. But you didn't hear it from me. And if you've got any sense in that stubborn head, you'll pretend you never heard it at all. Olivia looked at him for a long moment. Thank you, she said, and she meant it. Then she walked out into the wind. Smile. It took her 3 days to get there. 3 days of thumbing rides she was afraid to take and walking the stretches where nobody stopped. 3 days of that ring burning a hole in the bottom of her backpack wrapped in an old sock. Because every time she looked at it, she thought about food. And every time she thought about food, she had to talk herself out of it all over again. You are the dumbest smart person I've ever met, she muttered to herself somewhere around mile 40. You know that you could be sleeping in a real bed right now. But that was the thing nobody understood about Olivia Bennett. She hadn't lost everything because she was reckless. She'd lost everything because she wouldn't do the things that would have saved her, the laws, the shortcuts, the looking away. She'd watched her whole life fall apart precisely because she wouldn't become the kind of person who kept a thing that wasn't hers. And she wasn't about to start now. Not even for a warm bed. Not even for a full stomach. Not even she told herself if it got her killed. By the time she saw the clubhouse, she almost turned back 4 separate times. It sat at the edge of town low and long, and outside it was a wall of motorcycles lined up like an army at rest. Chrome and black. Men moving in the yard, big men, the kind of men her whole life had taught her to fear. Somewhere inside, music was playing, and someone laughed a rough, booming laugh. Olivia stood across the road with her heart trying to climb out of her throat. Turn around, the fear said. You've come far enough. You can mail it. You can leave it in a mailbox. You don't have to walk in there. You don't have to look at those men. And she almost listened. Then she thought about the name inside the band. Jay Carter. Somebody had loved that ring enough to carve their name into it, small and careful in a place only they would ever see. Somebody had lost it and probably thought it was gone forever. She thought about all the things she'd lost that no one had ever bothered to return. And Olivia Bennett crossed the road. She got about 20 feet before the yard went quiet. Not slowly, all at once. 1 second there was music and laughing and the clatter of a wrench, and the next there was nothing but the wind and the sound of her own footsteps in the gravel. Every man in that yard was looking at her. You lost sweetheart, one of them said. He was younger than the rest, with a beard down to his chest and arms like tree trunks, and he wasn't smiling. This ain't a place you wander into. Olivia's mouth had gone dry as the desert behind her, but she made herself speak, and she made her voice come out steady even though her hands were shaking. I'm looking for Jackson Carter. The yard got quieter, which she hadn't thought was possible. The young one took a step toward her. Now why, he said slowly, would somebody like you be looking for Jackson? I have something of his. You have something of his. He laughed, and it wasn't a nice laugh, and a couple of the others laughed with him. You hear that boys, little girls, got something of Jackson's. He looked her up and down, taking in the backpack, the worn shoes, the dust on her jacket. You a cop. You don't look like a cop. You look like you slept in a ditch. I did, Olivia said, twice. That stopped him for a half second. He hadn't expected the truth. I'm not a cop, she said. I'm not anybody. I found something on the highway and it belongs to a man named Jay Carter, and I walked 3 days to bring it back, and I would really, really like to give it to him and leave. That's all. That's the whole thing. Yeah, the young one's eyes narrowed. And what did you find? I'm not showing you, Olivia said. The words came out before she could stop them, and the second they left her mouth, she saw the young man's face change, saw a flicker of real anger, and she thought, well, this is how I die, on a Tuesday, in a parking lot, because I'm too stubborn to know when to shut up. You're not showing me, he repeated, taking another step. I'm showing him. She lifted her chin. Her heart was slamming so hard she was sure they could all hear it. Because if it's what I think it is, it's private. It's got his name on it. And a man's name is his own business, not yours. For a long, terrible second, nobody moved. And then a voice came from the doorway of the clubhouse. Low, rough, older than the rest. Let her through. Jackson Carter was not what she'd pictured. She'd pictured a monster. She'd spent 3 days walking toward a monster in her head, some snarling, tattooed giant who'd take one look at her and decide she was more trouble than she was worth. The man in the doorway was big, yes, gray in his beard lines carved deep into his face, hands that looked like they'd broken more things than they'd built. But it was his eyes that stopped her, tired, careful. The eyes of a man who had seen too much and trusted too little and had made a lifetime out of expecting the worst from everyone who walked up to his door. Come here, he said. Olivia walked past the young man who stepped aside but didn't stop glaring, and she stopped a few feet from Jackson Carter and just stood there. Empty your hands, he said. She understood. She held both hands up open, then slowly reached into her backpack, pulled out the old sock, and unwrapped it in front of him. The ring rolled into her palm and caught the light. She watched his face. She would remember it for the rest of her life, the way that hard, careful, closed-off face came apart. His breath caught. His hand, one of those huge, scarred hands, came up halfway and then stopped hovering in the air like he was afraid it wasn't real. Where, he said. His voice had gone strange. Where did you get that? On the highway, route out past Hawthorne. It was in the dirt by a guardrail. She held it out to him. It's yours. The name inside says J. Carter. He didn't take it. He just stared at it. That ring, he said slowly, has been gone for 8 months. I know it's not much good to you now, but you don't understand. His eyes came up to her face and there was something in them she didn't have a word for. That ring was my brother's. Danny, he carved my name in it the day I patched in 40 years ago. His throat moved. He gave it to me the day he died. It never came off my hand. Not once, not in 8 years. Olivia went very quiet. And then 8 months ago, Jackson said, it was gone. And I tore this whole town apart looking, and I never found it. And I decided somebody took it off me while I was... He stopped, his jaw tightened. It doesn't matter. I decided it was gone. I decided I'd lost the last thing my brother ever gave me, and I was never getting it back. The wind moved through the quiet yard. And now here you are, he said. A girl who looks like she hasn't eaten in a week, holding gold in her hand, telling me she walked 3 days to give it back. He finally looked away from the ring. He looked at her. Why, he said. The word came out cracked. You could have sold it. You should have sold it. Look at you. You need it more than any person I've ever met needs anything. So why in God's name would you carry it 3 days across the desert to hand it back to a man everybody warned you would kill you for showing up here? And Olivia Bennett, who had thought about this exact question for 3 days and never once found a good answer, gave him the only true one she had. Because it wasn't mine. Papashkita. The whole yard heard it. Nobody laughed this time. Jackson Carter stood there and looked at this girl, this filthy, exhausted, stubborn girl, with dirt under her nails and $11 to her name, and something happened to his face that none of the men standing in that yard had ever seen before. His eyes filled. He blinked it back fast, the way a man like that always does. But it had been there, and everyone saw it. Say that again, he said quietly. It wasn't mine, Olivia repeated. You lost something that mattered to you. I've lost a lot of things that mattered to me, and nobody ever brought a single one of them back. Nobody ever even tried. She swallowed. I couldn't be one more person who kept something that wasn't theirs. I just couldn't. So I brought it back. For a long moment, Jackson Carter didn't move. Then slowly he reached out, not for the ring, and he closed her fingers around it with both of his enormous hands and held them there. You keep it a second longer, he said, his voice thick, because I want to remember for the rest of my life that a stranger put this back in my hand when she had every reason on earth not to. Behind her, Olivia heard the young man with the beard say very softly, I'll be damned. Jackson looked up at his men. His voice changed, got hard again, got commanding, but there was something underneath it now. This girl, he said loud enough for all of them, walked into our yard alone. She's got nothing. She found Danny's ring in the dirt and she brought it home. He looked around at every single face. You hear me? Nobody touches her. Nobody speaks to her sideways. As long as she wants to stand on this ground, she stands on it safe. That's not a request. A murmur went through the yard. Then one by one the men nodded. Jackson turned back to Olivia. He took the ring from her fingers, at last slid it onto his hand, where it had lived for 8 years before it vanished, and let out a long, shaking breath, like he'd been holding it for 8 months. "What's your name?" he said. Olivia Bennett." "When did you last eat Olivia Bennett?" She had to think about it. That was answer enough. Something flickered across his face, anger, but not at her. "Come inside," Jackson Carter said. "You're not walking anywhere else today." They gave her a plate of food that she tried very hard not to inhale like an animal, and failed. She sat at a long table in the clubhouse with maybe a dozen bikers around her, and she ate. And for a while, nobody said anything because they were all watching her eat like it was telling them a story, which she supposed it was. The young one with the beard sat down across from her partway through. Up close, he looked younger than she'd thought, and there was a sheepishness in his face now that she never would have guessed 20 minutes ago. "I'm Rooster," he said. "That's not a name. It's the name I've got." A grudging half smile. "Listen, out there, what I said about you sleeping in a ditch." "I did sleep in a ditch," Olivia said, mouthful. "You weren't wrong." Still, he rubbed at the back of his neck. "We don't get a lot of people walking up who mean us anything but trouble. You get used to expecting the worst." "Yeah," Olivia said quietly and set down her fork. "I know a little about that." Rooster studied her. "How'd a kid like you end up out on the highway with nothing?" And Olivia, who had not told the story to a single soul, who had held it clenched inside her like a fist for 11 months, opened her mouth to give the short version, the easy version, the version that skipped the parts that hurt. But something about the room stopped her. Maybe it was the food in her stomach. Maybe it was Jackson Carter sitting at the head of the table turning his brother's ring around and around on his finger. Maybe it was just that these were the first people in almost a year who'd looked at her like she was a person. "I lost my job," she said. "That's how it starts, right? You lose a job. Everybody loses a job." She traced a scratch in the table with her fingernail. "But when you don't have anybody, no family that'll take you, no friends with his couch, nothing, losing a while isn't a setback. It's a cliff. And I found out real fast how many people will watch you fall off a cliff and just look away." Her voice caught. She pushed through it. "That's the part nobody tells you. It's not the falling that gets you. It's how many people see you falling and decide it's not their problem." The table had gone quiet. "I had a landlord who changed the locks while I was at a job interview," she said. "A boyfriend who—" She stopped, shook her head. "That's a different story. Point is, I ran out of people before I ran out of money, and then I ran out of money too. And I ended up on a highway with a backpack watching the ground because the ground was the only thing that never looked away from me." Nobody spoke. Then Jackson Carter said from the head of the table without looking up from the ring, "You know what they say about us, about the club?" "I've heard the stories," Olivia admitted. "Most of them are wrong." He finally raised his eyes. "But here's the one thing they never get right. You want to know why men end up here on these bikes in this life?" He gestured around the room at all of them. "Because every man at this table got looked away from too. Every single one. Society decided we were trouble and turned its back, and you know what you do when the whole world turns its back on you." "What?" "You find the other people it turned its back on," Jackson said, "and you build something, and you take care of your own, because nobody else is going to." He looked at her steadily. "You just did the most Hell's Angels thing I've ever seen a person do, Olivia Bennett, and you're not even in the club." "I returned a ring," she said. "You took care of something that mattered to somebody," Jackson said, "when you had every reason to take care of yourself instead." That's the whole thing. That's the entire code right there. Most people who've worn this patch for 20 years don't understand it as good as you just showed me you do. Olivia didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. And Jackson Carter looked at her for a long moment, and then he asked the question that would change the direction of her entire life. "Where you headed after this?" "I don't know," Olivia said honestly. "Nowhere. Somewhere. Anywhere that'll have me, I guess." Jackson set the ring flat on the table. "Stay a few days," he said. "Rest up. Eat. Get your feet under me." He held up a hand before she could argue. "It's not charity. You did us a kindness. We repay kindness. That's all this is. I can't just—" "You can just—" His tone left no room. Then it softened barely. You've been carrying everybody's disappointment for a year, kid. Put it down for a couple days. The world will still be there when you pick it back up. And Olivia Bennett, who hadn't cried in front of another human being in longer than she could remember, had to look down at the table very hard for a moment. Okay, she said finally in a small voice. A couple days. She had no idea sitting at that table that a couple days was about to turn into the fight of her life. Because there was something Olivia didn't know yet, something Jackson Carter didn't say out loud that first night, even as he watched her eat, even as he turned his brother's ring on his finger and felt 8 months of grief slowly loosen its grip on his chest. He didn't tell her that the ring hadn't just been lost. He didn't tell her that 8 months ago, on the same stretch of highway where she'd found it, there'd been a night he didn't like to think about, a night that ended with him waking up in a ditch himself, his head split open, the ring gone from his hand, and his memory of the whole evening scrubbed clean. He didn't tell her that he'd never believed for 1 second that he'd simply dropped it. And he didn't tell her the name that had been circling that whole ugly business like a vulture for the better part of a year, a name that half the town said in a whisper and the other half said with a smile, a name attached to money and lawyers and a big shining plan for a piece of land the club had sat on for 30 years. Victor Hale. Jackson didn't say any of it that first night. But he thought it. He sat at the head of that table and watched a homeless girl hand him back the last piece of his dead brother, a piece that had vanished on the worst night of the last decade of his life. And a cold, quiet certainty settled into his gut like a stone dropping into still water. That ring didn't end up on the highway by accident. Somebody had put it there, or lost it there carrying it the night they'd left him bleeding in the dirt and assumed he'd never remember a thing. And now, 8 months later, through some impossible thread of fate, the one person in the world honest enough to carry it 3 days across the desert, instead of pocketing it, had walked it right back to his door. Which meant Olivia Bennett wasn't just a girl who'd done a good deed. She was, without knowing it, holding the loose end of something that a very powerful man had spent a great deal of money to make sure stayed buried forever. Jackson looked across the table at her, laughing now. A real laugh at something Rooster had said, her guard down for the first time in what looked like a year, and he made a decision he wouldn't tell her about either. Whatever this is, he thought, whatever's coming, and something's coming, that girl doesn't take the fall for it. Not her, not after what she just did. He didn't know yet how impossible that promise would be to keep. He didn't know that Olivia Bennett was not the kind of woman who let anybody take a fall for her, that the same stubborn spine that walked her into a Hells Angels clubhouse to return a ring was about to walk her straight into the middle of Victor Hale's war, whether Jackson liked it or not. He just knew, watching her, that the ground had shifted. And somewhere across town, in an office with glass walls and a view of the very land he wanted to build his empire on, a man named Victor Hale was about to get a phone call he did not want. She's back. The ring's back. Carter has it again. And everything Victor Hale had spent 8 months in a small fortune building was about to depend on making one homeless girl disappear before she understood what she'd found. He wouldn't understand Victor Hale sitting in his glass office. He wouldn't understand any better than Jackson had at first. Why didn't she just keep it? He would spend the next several weeks learning the hard way exactly why. Because Olivia Bennett had already answered that question 3 times now, to 3 different people, and she would answer it 100 more times before this was over, and the answer never changed. And the answer was the one thing a man like Victor Hale had never once in his life understood. Because it wasn't hers. And a woman who wouldn't keep a ring that wasn't hers was never, ever going to look away from the truth once she found it. The phone call came at 7 the next morning, and it was the wrong kind of call. Olivia was still asleep on the cot they'd set up for her in the back room, the first real sleep she'd had in months, when she heard Jackson's voice through the wall. Not loud, that was the thing that woke her. Jackson Carter was a man whose quiet was louder than most men's shouting. Say that again, he was saying. Slow. She sat up, pulled her jacket on over the borrowed shirt Rooster had found her, and she stood at the door, not opening it, listening to a man's voice go from careful to cold in the space of a single sentence. No, you tell him I said no. You tell Hale I'm not selling, I'm not leasing, I'm not signing one more piece of paper, and the next time he sends a lawyer to my door, I'm going to send him back without his shoes. A pause. I don't care what the county says. That land's been ours 30 years. Another pause longer, and when he spoke again, His voice had dropped to almost nothing. What did you say his name was? The inspector. Olivia opened the door. Jackson was standing in the middle of the main room with the phone pressed to his ear and his brother's ring catching the morning light, and when he saw her, his whole face closed up like a fist. He turned away, lowered his voice further, said something she couldn't hear, and hung up. For a moment, neither of them said anything. You heard that? Jackson said. It wasn't a question. Some of it. She came a few steps into the room. Who's Hale? And she watched him decide whether to lie to her. She'd gotten good at watching people decide whether to lie. It was a specific expression, a flicker around the eyes, the pause where a person weighs the truth against the trouble it'll cause. She'd seen it on landlords and bosses, and a boyfriend once, and she saw it now on Jackson Carter's weathered face, and some part of her braced for it because everybody lied to her eventually. Everybody looked away. Then Jackson exhaled and pulled out a chair and sat down heavy and said, "Sit down, kid. I owe you the truth, and you're going to wish I didn't." She sat. Victor Hale, Jackson said, is a businessman, big one, owns half the commercial property in 3 counties. He's got a plan for a development out here, houses a shopping center, the whole thing. Calls it revitalization. He said the word like it tasted bad. And there's exactly one piece of land standing in the way of his plan being worth what he wants it to be worth. You want to guess whose land? Yours. Ours, the club's. 30 years we've sat on it. It's not just dirt to us, half our brothers are buried out back of it. Jackson turned the ring slowly. Hale's been trying to buy us out for a year and a half, offered money first. Then he offered more money. Then about 8 months ago, he stopped. 8 months ago, what? Jackson looked at her. And Olivia saw him make a second decision, a harder one, and this time he didn't flinch away from it. 8 months ago, he said, I got a call, late. Somebody wanting to meet said they had information about Hale, said to come alone to a spot out on the highway. The stretch past Hawthorne. He watched her face change as she recognized it. Yeah, that stretch. I went. I shouldn't have. I knew better. 40 years in this life should have taught me better, but I went. His jaw tightened. I don't remember what happened. That's the truth of it. I remember getting there. I remember headlights. And then I remember waking up in the ditch the next morning with my head split open and my brother's ring gone off my hand. Olivia went cold all over. You think somebody set you up? She said slowly. You think somebody hit you and took the ring? I knew somebody did, but I couldn't prove a thing. No witnesses, no memory, just a bump on my head and a story that sounds crazy when you say it out loud. He spread his hands. So I let it go. I told myself I dropped it. I told myself I was a drunk old fool who lost the last thing his brother gave him because he couldn't hold his liquor and drove out to nowhere on a bad tip. His voice roughened. I've been telling myself that for 8 months, Olivia. But you didn't believe it. No. He looked her dead in the eye. And then yesterday, a girl walks up out of nowhere and puts that exact ring back in my hand and tells me she found it in the dirt on that exact stretch of highway. He leaned forward. You understand what that means. You understand what you actually found out there. Olivia's mouth had gone dry. It means it didn't fall off your hand. It means it fell off somebody else's, Jackson said. The night they left me for dead, somebody was carrying it. And somewhere between taking it and doing whatever they were going to do with it, they lost it. In the dark. In the dirt. And it sat there 8 months until the one honest person left in the state of Nevada came along and picked it up. The room was very quiet. That's why the diner guy was scared, Olivia said half to herself. That's why everybody warned me. This isn't about a ring. No, Jackson said. It never was. And that should have been the moment Olivia got scared and ran. Jackson clearly wanted her to. She could see it in his face the way he was watching her waiting, half hoping she'd say, okay, this is too much. I'm out, so he could put her on a bus with some cash and get her clear of it. Instead, Olivia sat there and felt something she hadn't felt in almost a year. She felt her spine come back. Why would Hale want the ring, she asked. If he just wanted the land, why go to the trouble? Why not just keep making offers? Jackson blinked. He hadn't expected the question. Nobody in 8 months had asked him the right question, and this dirt poor girl had walked up to it in about 90 seconds. I don't know, he admitted. Yes, you do, Olivia said. You've thought about it for 8 months. You've got to guess. Say it. And Jackson Carter looked at this girl, telling him to say the thing he'd never said out loud, and something in him gave way. Because, he said slowly, if my ring the ring, Everybody in this county knows I've warned for 8 years turned up somewhere it shouldn't. A crime scene, a body, something ugly. He watched her follow it. Then it wouldn't matter that I didn't do it. It'd have my name on it, literally carved inside, and Jackson Carter, president of the Hells Angels chapter that won't sell its land, goes to prison, and the club falls apart, and Victor Hale buys the land off whoever's left for pennies. The words hung there. He was going to frame you, Olivia said. That's my guess. Jackson sat back, and your good deed just took his weapon away from him. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then from the doorway, Rooster's voice low and grim, "Boss, you're gonna want to come see this." Again, there was a car parked across the road from the clubhouse. Black, clean, expensive. The kind of car that did not belong on that road idling there like it had all the time in the world. And inside it, a man in a suit was taking pictures. "He's been there 20 minutes, Rooster said, just sitting, taking pictures of the yard, of the bikes." His eyes flicked to Olivia, of her when she came out this morning. Olivia felt the cold come back. "That's Hale's man," Jackson said flatly. "That's how he does it. Doesn't come himself. Sends a suit to sit and watch and let you know you're being watched." He turned to Olivia and his voice changed when urgent. "Listen to me. He's already got your face. He saw you hand me the ring, or one of his people did. That's how they knew to call me this morning. That's why the timing's like this. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get you on a bus this afternoon, somewhere far, and I'm going to give you enough to land on your feet, and you're going to forget you ever heard the name Victor Hale. You did your good deed. Now let me do mine." Olivia looked at the black car. She looked at the man taking pictures, and something old and hard rose up in her, something that had been beaten down for 11 months but had never quite died. "No," she said. Jackson stared at her. "Olivia, you want to know what I've done for 11 months?" She turned to face him, and her voice was shaking but not with fear. "I've run. That's all I've done. Landlord changes the locks, I run. Boss lets me go, I run. Boyfriend." She stopped, swallowed. "Every single time something went wrong, I put my head down and I ran because I told myself I was small and I was alone and there was nothing else to do. And you know where running got me? A ditch on the highway. $11, watching the ground." Her jaw set. "I'm done running, Jackson. I found that ring. That makes me part of this, whether you like it or not. And I am not getting on a bus so I can spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have stopped a man from destroying the first people who were ever kind to me." The room was dead silent. Rooster was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. Even the men in the yard had gone still. Jackson Carter looked at her for a long, long moment. "You are," he said finally, "the most impossible person I have ever met. So I've been told. You could get hurt. You understand that Hale doesn't play. People who get in his way lose jobs, lose homes, lose worse. And you've got nothing to lose but yourself." "Then I've got nothing he can take," Olivia said. "That's the one thing being homeless is good for. There's nothing left to threaten." She looked at him steady. "But you've got something to lose. All of you. So let me help. Let me be the one thing he never sees coming. Because who's going to suspect a girl with a backpack in 11 doors? And Jackson Carter, who had spent 40 years learning to trust nobody, who had walked into a trap 8 months ago and paid for it in blood and grief, looked at Olivia Bennett and did the thing that would either save the club or get them all killed. He nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, kid, we do it your way." He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the black car still sitting there. "But we do it smart, and you do what I say when I say it, no argument." "I can't promise no argument." Despite everything, Jackson almost smiled. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you can, so I am." The first thing they needed was to understand what Hale was actually building. Not the ring, not the frame-up, the whole plan. Because Olivia had figured something out overnight lying on that cot, and she laid it out at the table that morning, while a dozen bikers listened to a homeless girl explain their own situation to them. "He doesn't just want your land," she said. "Think about it. A man like that with all that money, your one piece of dirt, isn't worth blowing up his whole reputation over. There's something else. There has to be. What's the development actually for?" Rooster shrugged. "Houses, stores. He says it's for the community. Revitalization." Says, Olivia latched onto the word. But who's it actually helping? Who gets the houses? Who gets the jobs? Nobody at the table knew. That, Olivia said, is the answer. Because if it was really for the community, everybody'd know. He'd be shouting it. Men like Hale don't do quiet charity. If he's keeping the details quiet, it's because the details are the problem. She looked around the table. There's public money in this, isn't there? Development like that county, money, state money grants. Money that's supposed to go to helping people. One of the older bikers, a man named Dutch, who Olivia would learn, had once been an accountant in another life, sat up slowly. There's a development grant, Dutch said. Community Revitalization Fund. State money, I saw it in the paper, millions. Supposed to go to affordable housing job, training a community center. He frowned. Hale's the lead developer on the application. The table went quiet. There it is, Olivia breathed. That's not about your land at all. Your land is just the piece he needs to unlock the grant. He gets your dirt, he gets the whole parcel. He qualifies for millions in public money that's supposed to build affordable housing. And instead he builds whatever the hell he wants and pockets the difference. Dutch finished. My God, it's a skim. The whole revitalization thing is a front for a skim. And the one thing standing between him and millions of dollars, Olivia said, is a bunch of bikers who won't sell. So he needs you gone. Not bought out, gone. Discredited. In prison. Because a club with a president in prison for something ugly, that club's land gets sold cheap, and nobody in the community fights for the bikers. Everybody already thinks they're criminals. She looked at Jackson. That's why the ring. He wasn't just framing you. He was framing you so he could steal money that was supposed to go to exactly the kind of people you all used to be. The forgotten ones. Jackson Carter stared at her. How tell, he said slowly, did you figure out in one night what I couldn't figure out in 8 months? Because you've been thinking like a man defending his home, Olivia said. I've been thinking like the person that money's supposed to help, the homeless, the broke, the forgotten. Her voice went quiet. That community center he's pretending to build, the job training, the affordable housing, that's the exact thing that could have saved me 8 months ago. That's the thing that isn't there when you fall off the cliff. And he's stealing it. He's stealing the safety net right out from under people who are drowning so he can build a strip mall and call it charity. She was gripping the edge of the table hard enough that her knuckles had gone white. So, she said, I'm not getting on a bus, not now. Now it's personal. They had a theory. What they didn't have was proof. And that was the problem that ate at Olivia for the next 3 days as she moved into the clubhouse like she'd always been there. As the men stopped looking at her sideways and started looking to her as Jackson turned that ring on his finger and let a woman half his age drive the whole thing forward. A theory wasn't enough. A theory was just angry bikers pointing fingers at a rich man, and everybody in the county already believed the bikers were the bad guys. They needed something Hale couldn't lie his way out of. They needed a document, a witness, a paper trail, something that connected the grant money to the fraud to the land to the frame-up. And Olivia realized on the third night that she knew exactly where to start. The inspector, she said. Jackson looked up. What? On the phone, that first morning, you asked about an inspector. You said, what did you say his name was, the inspector? She watched him remember. Hale's got an inspector, a county inspector, somebody who signs off on whether your land is suitable for development, whether it needs to be condemned, whether it's environmentally clear. Somebody with a signature that's worth a lot of money to the right buyer. Marsh, Jackson said slowly. The county called it in. Environmental review. Guy named Marsh came out, poked around our land last month, said he'd file a report. And if that report says your land is contaminated or unsafe or historically insignificant, then the county can force a sale, Dutch said. Eminent domain, public interest. They can take it. So Marsh is the key, Olivia said. If Hale's paying him, if that report's already written to say whatever Hale needs it to say, then Marsh is the crack in the wall. He's the guy who's not a criminal. He's just a county employee who took some money and doesn't fully understand what he's part of. She stood up, energy crackling off her now. People like that, they break. You don't threaten them. You show them what they're actually doing, and half of them can't live with it. Rooster frowned. And how do you plan to get to a county inspector? You think he's going to sit down for coffee with the Hells Angels? No, Olivia said. He's not going to sit down with the Hells Angels. She spread her hands, indicating herself the worn jacket, the tired face, the backpack she still carried out of habit. But a homeless girl who wants to know if there's any assistance programs in the new development, a girl who heard there might be affordable housing coming, who wants to fill out a form, ask a few questions, find out if there's a place for someone like her in Mr. Hale's beautiful revitalization. She smiled, and it was a hard, bright, dangerous smile. Nobody's scared of me. That's my whole weapon. Nobody has ever once been scared of me. Let's use it. The table was silent. Then Jackson Carter started to laugh, a real laugh, low and rolling, the first one Olivia had heard from him. Danny would have loved you, he said, shaking his head. God almighty, Danny would have loved you. The county building was cold and beige and smelled like old coffee, and Olivia Bennett walked in wearing her own worn clothes and carrying her own real desperation, because the plan only worked if she didn't have to fake a thing. She found Marcia's office on the second floor, knocked. A tired man in his 50s looked up from a desk buried in paper. Help you? I hope so. She sat down before he offered, the way desperate people do, the way she'd have done for real 6 months ago. I heard about the new development, the revitalization thing. Somebody said there might be affordable housing job training. She let her voice do the thing it did all on its own. Now the fatigue, the hope she was afraid to feel. I don't have anywhere to go, sir. I've been sleeping rough. I heard this might be a place for people like me, and I needed to ask somebody who'd know. Are they really building it? Is it real? And she watched Marcia's face. She watched a tired county inspector look at a real homeless girl, asking about a program he knew was never going to help a single homeless girl. And she watched the guilt cross his face like a shadow. He started, stopped. You'd have to ask the developer about the housing programs. That's not They said you did the report, the one that decides if it can be built. She leaned forward. Is the land good? It gonna happen, because I've got nothing, sir. I've been counting on this. I heard about it, and it was the first hope I've had in a year, and I just need to know if it's real. Marsh couldn't look at her. That was when she knew. It's real, he said quietly. The development's real. It's gonna get built. And the housing, the center, the trainings, a long pause. You should ask the developer, Marsh said again, and his voice had gone hollow. Olivia sat very still, and then she did the thing she hadn't planned, the thing that came from somewhere true, because she'd been on the other side of exactly this her whole life. You know it's not real, she said softly. Don't you? Marcia's head came up. You know there's no housing coming for people like me. You know the money that's supposed to build it is going somewhere else. And you signed something that helps it happen, and you've been telling yourself it's not your problem, it's above your pay grade, you just do the reports. Her voice never rose. It didn't have to. I know that look, sir. I've seen it my whole life. It's the look people get right before they look away from me. I've watched 100 people make that exact face right before they decided I wasn't their responsibility. She held his eyes. You don't have to make it again. That's all. You get to decide right now whether you're one more person who looks away. The office was silent except for the hum of a fluorescent light. Marcia's hands were shaking. You need to leave, he whispered. You don't understand who you're dealing with. If he knew you were here, if he knew I was talking to you, he put your name on something, didn't he? Olivia said. So if it ever comes apart, it's your signature, not his. Yours. You're the one who goes down. She watched it land. You're not the villain here, Mr. Marsh. You're just the guy holding the bag when it all falls apart. And it's going to fall apart. So the only question is whether you're standing next to it when it does, or whether you help stop it. For a long moment, she thought she'd lost him. Then Marsh opened a drawer with a trembling hand and pulled out a plain manila folder and set it on the desk and pushed it 2 inches toward her. I never gave you this, he said hoarsely. I never saw you. You were never here. You were never here, Olivia agreed. The report they filed isn't the one I wrote. Marcia's voice cracked. My report says the land's clean, historically significant. Even there's graves on it, veterans. It should be protected. The one they filed says it's contaminated and needs to be condemned. Same cover sheet, my name. Different pages. A tear tracked down his tired face. I found out 3 weeks ago. I've been sick over it ever since. I've got a family. I've got a mortgage. I didn't know what to do. Olivia took the folder. Her hands weren't quite steady either. You did the right thing, she said quietly. Finally, and I'm going to make sure it counts. She stood to go. Wait, Marsh said. She turned. That's not the worst of it. He looked up at her and his face had gone gray. There's a reason they need the land condemned fast. There's a deadline on the grant. If the parcel isn't cleared and transferred by the end of the month, Hale loses the whole thing, the money reverts, the deal collapses. He swallowed. That's 4 days away. He's got 4 days to get that land, or he loses everything he's built. And a man like that, with 4 days and millions on the line, Marsh's voice dropped to almost nothing. He's not going to wait for the county. He's going to do something, soon, to force it. And when he does, that club of yours is going to be standing right in the middle of it. Olivia's blood ran cold. 4 days. She gripped the folder tighter and walked out of that office and down the beige hallway and out into the parking lot, and she called the number Jackson had given her, and when he picked up, she said the only thing that mattered. I've got proof. The reports were switched. Marsh gave me the real one. She was already walking faster. But Jackson, we've got 4 days. The grant expires in 4 days. And Marsh says Hale's not going to wait. He's going to force it somehow. Something's coming, and it's coming fast, and it's coming at you. There was a silence on the line. Get back here, Jackson said. Now. Yeah, but Victor Hale was faster than any of them. Because while Olivia was driving back to the clubhouse with a folder full of the truth on the seat beside her, a very different kind of meeting was happening in a glass office across town. And Olivia didn't know it yet, but the black car that had been parked across the road all week had done more than take pictures. It had followed her to the county building, up to the second floor. And a man in a suit had watched a homeless girl walk into the office of a county inspector named Marsh and walk out 20 minutes later, carrying a manila folder she hadn't gone in with, and he had made a phone call. By the time Olivia pulled back into the clubhouse yard, clutching the proof that could save everything, Victor Hale already knew she had it. And he already knew there was only one thing left to do about a homeless girl with a folder and 4 days on the clock. She parked. She grabbed the folder. She ran for the door where Jackson and Rooster and Dutch were already waiting, their faces tight, because they'd seen the black car pull away from across the road the moment she pulled in, following her, tracking her gone now to report. He knows, Rooster said grimly as she reached them. Whatever you got, he knows you got it. Olivia stood there in the yard with the folder pressed against her chest and her heart slamming, and she looked at Jackson Carter, at the ring on his hand, at the men who had gone from strangers to something like family in the space of 4 days, and she understood exactly what she'd done. She'd taken away Victor Hale's weapon, and now she'd become one. Then we don't have 4 days, she said. We have however long it takes him to decide I'm the problem. She held the folder out to Jackson. This is everything. The switched reports. Marsh's real findings. There's graves on your land. Jackson veterans protected. The whole thing should be untouchable. Hale forged a government document to steal it. This is enough to end him. Jackson took the folder, opened it, read. And Olivia watched the man's face harden into something she hadn't seen yet. Not grief, not caution, not even anger. Certainty. This is it, he said quietly. This is the thing I've been waiting 8 months for. He looked up at her, and there was something almost like awe in his tired eyes. You walked in there with nothing, and you walked out with the one thing that can bury him. Nobody was scared of me, Olivia said. I told you that was the whole plan. And then Rooster's phone rang. He answered it, listened, and Olivia watched every drop of color drain out of the big man's face. Boss, Rooster said, slowly lowering the phone. That was Tank. He's watching the road. He swallowed. There's cars coming. 3 of them. Suits, and a county sheriff's cruiser leading the way. His eyes came up. Hale's not waiting for the deadline. He's not waiting for anything. He's coming here right now, and he's bringing the law. The yard went silent. Olivia looked at the dust already rising on the road in the distance, 3 sets of headlights, and the flash of a cruiser's light bar, coming fast, coming for them, coming for the folder in Jackson's hands, and the girl who'd gone and gotten it. 4 days had just become 4 minutes. And Olivia Bennett, who had run from every hard thing for 11 months, who had sworn she was done running, planted her feet in that yard beside a man with a skull ring and a family of outlaws who'd taken her in when the whole world looked away and did not move an inch. Give me the folder, Jackson said. Olivia didn't move. Jackson, give me the folder and go inside and lock the door. He was already pulling his shoulders back, already becoming the man who'd run this club for 40 years. Whatever's about to happen out here, you don't need to be standing in the middle of it. No, I assume. Olivia, they already know I have it, she said fast, the words tumbling out. Marcia's office had cameras. They followed me. If you hide me, it just proves it's real. It just proves you're protecting something. But if I'm standing right here in the open with nothing to hide, she grabbed his arm. You think like a man in a war, Jackson. I'm telling you, this isn't a war we win by hiding. It's a war we win by being seen. The cars were close now. She could hear the engines. Jackson looked at the folder, looked at her, and made a decision that went against every instinct 40 years had built into him. Dutch, he said, not taking his eyes off Olivia. That folder, I want 3 copies made in the next 10 minutes. 1 goes in the safe, 1 goes to the lawyer, 1 goes, he thought, 1 goes to the newspaper, the real one. The Reno paper, the reporter who did the piece on the grant. You still got her card. Dutch was already moving. On it. And somebody get a phone out and start recording, Jackson said louder now to the whole yard. Everything, every word that gets said out here. If Victor Hale wants to bring the law to my door, then the law's going to do it on camera. The men scattered into motion. And then the cars were there, spilling gravel as they stopped, and doors were opening, and a county sheriff in a pressed uniform was stepping out of the lead cruiser with 2 deputies behind him, and behind them, unfolding himself from the back of the black sedan like he had all the time in the world, was a man Olivia had never seen but recognized instantly. Victor Hale. He was younger than she'd pictured, handsome in an expensive bloodless way, a suit that cost more than everything the club owned put together, and a smile, a warm, easy practice smile that he aimed straight at Jackson Carter like they were old friends who'd just run into each other. Jackson, Hale said, I wish this could have gone another way. I really do. Victor, Jackson's voice was flat. Little far from your office, aren't you? I like to handle important things personally. Hale's eyes moved across the yard, taking it in the bikes, the men, the phones, already up and recording, and then they landed on Olivia. And she watched the smile flicker just for a half second before it came back stronger. And this must be the young lady everyone's been talking about. I'm nobody, Olivia said. You said so yourself, right? Some homeless girl. The smile tightened at the edges. Sheriff Hale said smoothly, turning away from her, if you do your job. The sheriff stepped forward, and he had the decency at least to look uncomfortable about it. Jackson, I've got a court order here. County's declaring this parcel condemned pending environmental review. You've got 24 hours to vacate. He held out a paper. I'm sorry, I don't like it any better than you do. But it's signed, and it's legal, and I've got to serve it. Jackson didn't take the paper. Environmental review, he said slowly, the one Marsh did. That's right. The one that says my land's contaminated. That's what it says. Jackson looked at Olivia, and Olivia looked at the sheriff, and she took a breath, and she stepped forward. One homeless girl in a worn jacket, in a yard full of bikers and lawmen, and a millionaire. And she said the words she'd driven 90 miles an hour to be able to say. That report's a forgery. The yard went still. The sheriff turned to her. Excuse me, the environmental report Mr. Hale filed with the county, the one that says this land's contaminated. Olivia's voice was shaking, but it carried. It's fake. The Inspector Marsh, he wrote a real report. It says the land's clean. It says there's veterans' graves out back, protected ground that legally cannot be developed. She held Hale's eyes as she said it. Somebody took Marsh's real report, kept the cover page with his name and signature, and swapped out the findings. Somebody forged a government document to steal protected land and unlock a multi-million-dollar public grant. For one perfect second, nobody spoke. Then Victor Hale laughed. It was a good laugh, warm, easy, disbelieving, exactly the laugh of an innocent man hearing something absurd. I'm sorry, he said, wiping his eye. Sheriff, is this what we're doing? Standing in a Hells Angels compound, listening to a homeless girl accuse me of forgery? Do you have any idea who these people are? Do you know how many times this club has been investigated? And you're going to take the word of, he gestured at Olivia, this over a signed, filed official county document. And it was working. Olivia could see it working. She could see the doubt cross the sheriff's face, the old easy story clicking into place. The criminal bikers, the drifter girl, the respectable businessman. It was the story everybody already believed. It was the story that had left her in a ditch. It was the story Victor Hale had been counting on his whole life. Do you have this real report? The sheriff asked her. This supposedly real one. We're making copies of it right now, Olivia said. It's going to your office, it's going to the state grant board, and it's going to the Reno Gazette. Hale's smile didn't move, but his eyes did. Just a flicker toward the black car, toward the man in the suit still sitting in it, and Olivia understood in that flicker that Victor Hale had already thought about this, had already planned for it, that a man like this didn't walk into a yard full of enemies without knowing exactly how it was going to end. Sheriff Hale said, and his voice had changed, gone quieter, more serious, more reasonable. I want to be very careful here because I don't want anyone to get hurt. But I think you should know something about the young woman who's making these accusations. He turned to Olivia with an expression of almost gentle regret. What's your name, sweetheart? Your real name. Olivia's stomach dropped. You know my name. Olivia Bennett. Hale said it slowly, savoring it. 23 years old, no fixed address, recently unemployed, fired, actually, wasn't it? For theft. His eyes glittered. Petty theft from your former employer. It's in your record. Sheriff, you can run it right now if you don't believe me. The world tilted under Olivia's feet. That's not... Her voice came out strangled. That's not what happened. No, correct him. Hale spread his hands, all reasonableness. The record says otherwise. It says Olivia Bennett has a documented history of taking things that don't belong to her. He let it hang, let it poison the air. And now she shows up at a Hells Angels clubhouse of all places with a stolen government document that she claims is the real one, accusing an upstanding member of this community of a crime, a girl with a theft record, in the company of known criminals. He shook his head sadly. Sheriff, I think what we have here is a very troubled young woman who's been manipulated by these men into helping them forge documents to keep their land. And I think she needs help, not a platform. The sheriff was looking at Olivia differently now. Everyone was. And Olivia felt it, the old feeling, the falling feeling, the ground opening up under her, the way it always did the moment where the respectable people all turned as one to look away from her because she was the girl with nothing, and nothing was exactly what her word was worth. You son of a... Rooster started forward. Rooster. Jackson's voice cracked like a whip. Stand down. And Olivia stood there in the center of that yard with a theft charge on her record. She'd never explained to anyone watching the truth she'd fought for crumble in real time. And she understood that Victor Hale had just done to her the exact same thing he'd tried to do to Jackson. He'd found the ugly thing in her past, and he was holding it up so no one would look at anything else. She could feel herself starting to shake apart. And then Jackson Carter spoke. Tell him, he said quietly. She turned. What? The theft. He was looking at her steady, his tired eyes fixed on hers. You said it wasn't what happened. So tell him what happened. Right now, on camera, all these phones. Tell him the truth, kid. It's the only thing you've got, and it's the only thing that's ever mattered about you. His voice dropped. You didn't run 3 days across the desert to hand me back my dead brother's ring so you could stand here now and let this man tell your story for you. So tell it. And something in Olivia Bennett straightened. She looked at the sheriff. She looked at the phones. She looked at Victor Hale's patient, poisonous smile, and she told it. I worked at a grocery store, she said. Her voice was shaking, but it didn't stop. 11 months ago, overnight stock. And one night a woman came in with 2 little kids and she didn't have enough for formula. She was short $4 and she was crying, trying to put things back, deciding which of her kids ate that week. Olivia's throat worked. And I paid the $4 out of my own pocket, from the register because I didn't have my wallet on me, and I put 4 of my own dollars in at the end of my shift to cover it. I wrote it down. I told my manager the next day. The yard was silent. He fired me anyway, she said. Said it was theft. Said the rule was the rule and it didn't matter why. Said if he let me get away with it, everybody'd be handing out formula. A tear slipped down her face and she didn't wipe it. So yeah, that's my record. That's the theft. I gave a starving family $4 for baby formula, and I lost my job and my apartment and everything I had. And I ended up on a highway, watching the ground. She looked at Victor Hale. So go ahead. Tell everybody I'm a thief. Tell everybody I take things that don't belong to me. And then explain to them why a thief walked 3 days to give a stranger back a gold ring worth $1,000 when she had $11 to her name. Nobody moved. That's the thing you don't understand, Mr. Hale, Olivia said, and her voice had stopped shaking. You looked at my record and you saw a thief, but you didn't read it. Because if you'd read it, you'd know exactly what kind of person I am. I'm the kind of person who gives away the last thing she has to help somebody who needs it more. I'm the kind of person who returns what isn't hers even when keeping it would save her life. She took a step toward him. I'm the worst possible person for you to have picked a fight with, because I've got nothing left to lose and I don't look away and I do not stop. Something had shifted in the yard. Olivia could feel it. The sheriff wasn't looking at her like a criminal anymore. He was looking at her like a person. And Victor Hale had stopped smiling. Sheriff, Hale said, and there was a new edge in his voice now, a crack in the smooth surface. This is a very moving speech, but it doesn't change the fact that there's a signed county document ordering this land condemned, and you have a legal obligation to... The document's forged, Olivia cut in. And you know it's forged because you're the one who forged it. And here's how everybody's going to know. She turned to the sheriff. Marcia's real report is on protected veterans' graves. That's a federal matter. Once it's public, there's going to be a federal investigation into how a document about protected federal land got altered to strip that protection. And when they investigate that, they're going to follow the money. They're going to find the grant. They're going to find where it was really going to go. She looked back at Hale. You didn't just try to steal some land from some bikers, Mr. Hale. You forged a document about the graves of dead soldiers to steal money that was supposed to help homeless people. And that's the story that's going in the paper tomorrow morning. Not bikers won't sell that. Victor Hale's face had gone very still. And that was when Olivia knew with total certainty that she was right about everything. Because an innocent man would have kept arguing. An innocent man would have been confused, indignant, calling his lawyer. But Victor Hale wasn't doing any of those things. He was calculating. She could see it behind his eyes, the rapid, cold arithmetic of a man realizing his plan had just come apart, running the numbers on how much of it could still be saved. Sheriff, Hale said finally, very quietly, I'd like to speak with Mr. Carter, privately. I think we can resolve this like adults without all this theater. No, Jackson said. Hale blinked. Jackson, be reasonable. Whatever you think you have, we can come to an arrangement. I can make this very worth your while, all of you. I'm talking about numbers that would set every man here up for life. You'd never have to worry about this land, this club, any of it. Just about ye. He lowered his voice. Just let's keep this between us. And there it was, the offer. The bribe in front of the sheriff, in front of a dozen phones. Dutch's voice came from the doorway, calm and clear. You getting all this, boys? He just offered to buy our silence on camera. Hale's head snapped toward him. Yeah, we got it, Rooster said, holding up his phone, loud and clear. For the first time, Victor Hale looked something other than composed. He looked cornered. And a cornered man, Olivia was about to learn, is the most dangerous kind. Because Hale turned back to the sheriff, and his voice changed completely. Dropped the reasonableness, dropped the warmth, went cold and hard and final. Sheriff, I'm formally requesting that you take Olivia Bennett into custody right now for possession of a stolen government document. That folder in there is county property. She removed it from a county office without authorization. That's a crime, and you witnessed her admit to it. His eyes were flat. Do your job or I'll have your badge by Monday. You know I can. The sheriff hesitated. And Olivia understood in that hesitation exactly what Hale was doing. He couldn't stop the truth from coming out anymore. But he could still take her. He could arrest her, seize the folder tie, everything up in the system, drag it out past the 4-day deadline into weeks and months. And by the time it all got sorted out, the grant would be gone. The story would be old news, and a homeless girl with a theft record would be sitting in a cell while his lawyers made the whole thing disappear. He didn't need to win anymore. He just needed to run out the clock. Sheriff, Hale said. The girl, now. The sheriff took a step toward Olivia, and every man in that yard moved at once, not violently, not reaching for anything, but forward closing ranks, a wall of leather and muscle sliding between Olivia and the law, silent and absolute. Easy, Jackson said low to his men. Easy, hands where they can see him. Nobody does anything stupid. He looked at the sheriff. But she's not going anywhere. Not for handing a folder to a newspaper. You want her, you go through all of us, and you do it on every one of these cameras, and you explain to a judge why you arrested the girl who exposed the fraud instead of the man who committed it. The sheriff stopped. Olivia could see him doing his own arithmetic now. The bikers weren't threatening him. They were just standing there, a dozen witnesses, a dozen phones, and a girl who just told a story that had the ring of absolute truth. And Victor Hale, red-faced now, demanding an arrest that was going to look on every one of those cameras exactly like a rich man using the law to bury the truth. Mr. Hale, the sheriff said slowly, I think maybe I need to see this real report before I arrest anybody. You don't have the authority to... I've got the authority to not arrest somebody, the sheriff snapped, and Olivia realized he'd made his choice, and it wasn't Hale's. And I'm using it. Nobody's getting arrested in this yard today. If there's a forged document that's for the state and probably the feds, and I'm not touching it until somebody a lot higher than me tells me exactly what's going on. He turned to Olivia. Miss, that report, you said it's going to the Gazette. It's probably already there, Dutch said from the doorway, holding up his own phone. Just sent the copy. Reporter confirmed receipt. And Olivia watched Victor Hale's entire world end in real time. She watched the exact moment he understood that it was over, that the truth was already out, already copied, already in the hands of a reporter and a sheriff and a dozen cameras, that there was no arrest fast enough and no lawyer good enough and no lie smooth enough to put it back in the box. For a second, he just stood there, and then the mask came off completely. You have no idea what you've done, he said, and he wasn't talking to Jackson anymore. He was looking directly at Olivia, and his voice was low and vicious and stripped of every ounce of charm. You stupid little girl. You think you saved something that Grant was going to build the only thing this dead county has left. Jobs, growth, a future. I was going to make something out of this wasteland, and yes, I was going to make money doing it because that's how it works. That's how anything ever gets built. And you and these animals burned it down over some graves and a technicality and your own worthless pride. Some graves, Olivia repeated quietly. Veterans' graves, men who died. You call that a technicality. I call it an obstacle. His eyes blazed. Everything's an obstacle. Everything and everyone, including you. He took a step toward her, and Rooster's arms shot out across her chest, and Hale stopped, breathing hard. You want to know the truth since we're all being so honest. Yes, I had Carter's ring taken. Yes, that was the plan. Frame the biker, take the land, unlock the money. And it was a good plan, and it would have helped 100 times more people than it hurt. And the only reason it fell apart is because one homeless, nobody was too proud to keep a ring she found in the dirt. He laughed, and it was an ugly, broken sound. Do you understand the irony? Your one virtue, your one stupid, sentimental virtue. That's what ruined everything. If you'd been the thief I said you were, you'd have sold that ring, and I'd have won. The yard was dead silent, because Victor Hale had just confessed to everything, on camera, in front of the sheriff, in front of a dozen phones, in front of the girl he'd tried to destroy, driven past the point of caution by his own rage. He'd said all of it out loud. And Olivia Bennett looked at the man who'd left Jackson bleeding in a ditch, who'd tried to steal a soldier's grave, who'd called her worthless to her face, and she did not flinch, and she did not look away. You're right, she said softly. That's exactly why it fell apart. She reached over and gently pushed Rooster's protecting arm down, and she stood in the open facing Victor Hale with nothing between them. Because I wouldn't keep something that wasn't mine, she said. And you can't understand that. You've never understood it in your whole life. That's why you lost. Not because you weren't smart or rich or powerful. You were all of those things, and I'm none of them. Her voice was steady as stone. You lost because you built your whole plan on the idea that everybody's a thief if you give them the chance. And you were wrong about exactly one person. She heard the sheriff behind her quietly say to his deputy, "Get on the radio. I want the state on the line. And nobody let Mr. Hale leave this yard." Victor Hale heard it too. And Olivia watched the last of the color drain from his face as he understood that the man he'd threatened to fire 5 minutes ago had just decided to hold him, that the cameras were still rolling, that the confession was already recorded, that the report was already at the paper, that every single thing had already happened and could not be unhappened. It was over. But Victor Hale was not a man who lost gracefully. And there was one thing left in that yard that could still make everything disappear: the folder, the original folder sitting on Dutch's desk just inside that door. And Olivia saw his eyes move toward it. She saw the calculation. She saw the desperation. She saw a cornered, ruined, furious man look at the one piece of physical evidence that connected his forged signature to a soldier's grave and decide he had nothing left to lose. "Jackson," she said sharply, "the folder." But Victor Hale was already moving. He was fast for a man in an expensive suit through the doorway before anyone fully registered that he'd moved, lunging for the folder on Dutch's desk with both hands. But Dutch had spent 20 years reading people across poker tables before he ever put on a patch, and he'd seen it in Hale's eyes a half-second before Olivia's warning. He was already there. His hand came down flat on the folder as Hale's fingers reached it, and the two men froze, both hands on the same manila cover, staring at each other. "Let go," Hale breathed. "No," Dutch said calmly. And Hale Victor Hale, the man in the $1,000 suit who'd never in his life done a violent thing with his own two hands, grabbed Dutch by the collar and swung. It wasn't a good punch. Dutch barely moved. But it was a punch, and it was on camera, and the sheriff's voice cracked across the yard like thunder. "Hale, hands off him now." Two deputies were already moving. Hale swung again, wild, desperate, connecting with nothing but air. And then Dutch simply stepped back and let the deputies do their work, and Victor Hale went down onto the clubhouse floor with a knee in his back and a deputy's voice reading him his rights, and the folder never left the desk. For a moment, the only sound was Hale's ragged breathing and the click of the cuffs. "Assaulting a witness in front of law enforcement," the sheriff said flatly, standing over him. "Attempting to destroy evidence, and whatever the state does with the rest of it." He shook his head. "You should have stayed in your office, Mr. Hale." They pulled him to his feet. His suit was torn at the shoulder, now his hair fallen across his face, and the smooth, handsome mask was gone completely, and what was underneath was just a small, furious, frightened man who'd run out of moves. He looked at Olivia one last time as they walked him past. "You'll be back in that ditch by winter," he spat. "People like you always end up back in the ditch. Nobody's going to remember your name." And Olivia Bennett looked at the ruined man in the cuffs, and she felt no triumph and no fear, and not even much anger. She felt something quieter than all of that. "Maybe," she said, "but at least I'll remember it was mine." They took him out to the cruiser. The whole yard watched in silence as the black sedan and the sheriff's car and the two deputies' vehicles pulled out of the yard in a slow line, dust rising behind them, the light bar flashing once as they hit the road and then gone. And then it was quiet. Olivia stood in the middle of the yard, and her knees started to shake, and she realized she'd been holding her whole body rigid for what felt like hours. Rooster caught her elbow. "Whoa, easy. Sit down, kid. You look like you're about to—" "I'm fine," she said, and immediately sat down hard on an overturned crate. "I'm fine. I just need a second." Jackson came and stood in front of her. He was holding the folder now, and his brother's ring caught the light on his hand, and for a long moment, he just looked at her. "You know what you just did," he said. "Sat down," Olivia said weakly, very heroically. A laugh broke out of him, surprised and real, and then the whole yard was laughing, the pure, giddy laughter of men who'd been braced for a war, and instead watched it end in a torn suit and a pair of handcuffs. And Olivia found herself laughing too, half crying with it, the terror of the last hour leaving her body in shudders. Jackson crouched down in front of her so they were eye to eye. 8 months, he said quietly under the noise of 18. I lived with that ring gone 8 months, and I told myself I'd lost it, and I told myself the man who took it was going to get away with it forever because men like that always do. That was the thing I believed, Olivia. Down in my bones, that men like Victor Hale always win, and men like me always lose, and there was nothing to be done about it. He shook his head slowly. "And then you walked into my yard with nothing but a backpack, and in 4 days you took him apart. A homeless girl with $11. His voice roughened. "You didn't just get my ring back. You got me back. Something in me that I'd let die. Olivia didn't know what to say, so she said the true thing. I didn't do it alone. You made copies. You called the paper. You had them recording. If it was just me in that folder, Hale wins. He arrests me, buries the folder, runs out the clock. She looked around at the men. You all did that. I just walked into an office and asked a scared man a question. You gave him a reason to stop being scared, Jackson said. That's not nothing. That's everything. The days after were strange and busy and better than any Olivia could remember. The story broke in the Reno Gazette 2 mornings later, and it did not break small. Forged report, stolen graves. How a homeless woman exposed $1 million fraud. The reporter had done her homework. She'd gotten Marsh on the record, gotten the real report authenticated, gotten a state grant official to confirm on background that the money had been flagged and frozen. And she'd gotten the video, all of it. Hale's confession, the bribe, the punch, played and replayed until half the state had seen a rich man call a soldier's grave a technicality with his own mouth. Victor Hale was charged that week. Forgery of a government document, fraud, attempted grand theft, bribery, assault. His lawyers, of which there were many, filed motion after motion, but there is very little a lawyer can do with a client who confessed on 12 separate phones, and everyone knew it, and Hale knew it best of all. Marsh came forward on his own in the end, walked into the state office with his real report and his lawyer, and told them everything, how Hale's people had approached him, how much they'd paid, how he'd told himself it was just a signature, how the guilt had eaten him alive for 3 weeks until a homeless girl sat down in his office and made him look at what he'd done. He'd lose his job. He'd probably face charges of his own. But he'd sleep at night, he told the reporter, for the first time in a month. Olivia visited him once and thanked him, and he cried and couldn't speak, and she understood. The land was saved. More than saved. Once the graves were confirmed, 31 veterans, some going back to the First World War, buried on ground the club had been protecting without even fully knowing its worth. The state didn't just cancel the condemnation. They designated the parcel a protected historical site. Nobody would ever develop it. Nobody would ever try again. Jackson Carter stood at the edge of that land the day the designation came through his brother's ring on his hand, and Olivia stood beside him, and neither of them said anything for a long time. Danny's out here, Jackson said finally. Not with these 31, but close, just past the fence line, our own plot. He turned the ring slowly. He'd have liked knowing they were protected. He always said this ground meant something. I never fully understood what he meant till now. He looked at her. You gave that to him too. To all of them. You know that they gave it to themselves, Olivia said, by being here, by mattering enough that somebody tried to steal them. She looked out over the quiet ground. All I did was refuse to let people look away. The grant didn't die with Hale. That was the thing nobody expected, least of all Olivia. Because when the story broke, when the whole state watched a homeless woman expose a man for stealing money, meant to help the forgotten, something happened that the reporter would later call the strangest part of the whole affair. The Community Revitalization Fund, the millions Hale had been trying to skim, didn't just get frozen and quietly reabsorbed into some government account. People started asking where it was going now, and the state suddenly, under a very bright light, with a very sympathetic story attached to it, and an election year coming, decided that the money should go to exactly what it had been promised for. Affordable housing, job training, a community center. For real this time, under real oversight, and a board of local people to make sure it happened. The reporter called Olivia to tell her before it was public. They want local input on the board, she said. Community members, people who understand what the money's supposed to do. A pause. Your name came up. A lot. Would you serve? Olivia was quiet on the phone for a long moment. I don't have an address, she finally said. I don't have a job. I don't have any qualifications. I've got a theft charge on my record for baby formula and not even $11 anymore. She let out a shaky breath. Why would anybody want me on a board? Are you serious? The reporter almost laughed. Olivia, you're the only person in this whole thing who understood what the money was for. You're the only one who was ever going to be helped by it. Everybody else on that board is going to be a councilman or a banker who's never missed a meal in their life. You're the one who's actually been on the cliff. That's not a disqualification. That's the entire point. Olivia hung up the phone and sat down and put her face in her hands and cried for a long, long time. And nobody in the clubhouse asked her why, because they'd all watched enough by now to understand that some tears aren't sad ones. She said yes. Of course she said yes. But she almost didn't, and the almost not was the part that mattered, and it was Jackson who talked her through it late one night at the long table when the others had gone to sleep. I don't belong on a board, Jackson, she said. I know what I did I know it had mattered. But that was one thing, one good week. That doesn't make me somebody who sits at a table and decides things. I'm still just... Don't, Jackson said. What? Don't finish that sentence. I'm still just... He leaned forward. You've been saying it since you walked in here. I'm nobody. I'm just a homeless girl. Nobody's scared of me. You used it like a weapon, and it was a good one, and it worked. But it was never true, and I think somewhere along the way you started believing it, and I'm not going to sit here and watch you talk yourself back into that ditch when the whole world's finally trying to hand you a ladder out. Olivia looked down at the table. I don't know how to be anything but what I've been, she said quietly. Surviving, watching the ground. It's the only thing I know how to do. Then you'll learn a new thing, Jackson said. Same way you learned that. Same way we all learned everything. He turned the ring on his finger slow the way he did when he was choosing his words. You know what my brother told me the day he gave me this ring? He was dying. Cancer, the fast kind. And he took it off his hand and put it on mine, and he said, Jackson, the patch don't make the man. The man makes the patch. His eyes came up. I didn't get it for years. I thought being in the club made me somebody. Took me a long time to understand it was the other way around. The club was just leather. I had to be somebody, and then the leather meant something. He reached across the table and for the second time closed Olivia's hand in both of his. You think that board's gonna make you somebody, he said. It's backwards, kid. You already are somebody. You've been somebody this whole time. A homeless girl with $11 was already more of a somebody than Victor Hale ever was in his life. The board's just leather. You put it on, and it's gonna mean something because you're the one wearing it. You understand me? And Olivia, who had spent 11 months believing the world was right about her, looked at this old outlaw who'd taken her in and felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. She believed him. There was one more thing to settle, though. One thing that had nagged at Olivia through all of it, and she didn't bring it up until the night before she was supposed to move into the little apartment the club had helped her find a real place with a door that locked the first she'd had in almost a year. Jackson, she said, that night, 8 months ago, on the highway. He looked up. You never found out who actually did it, who hit you, who took the ring. She watched his face. Hale confessed to ordering it, but he didn't do it himself. A man like that never does. Somebody drove out there in the dark and hit you and left you in a ditch. And that person dropped the ring on the highway where I found it. That person's still out there. Jackson was quiet for a moment. Marsh gave to the state the name, he said finally. Part of his statement, a man Hale used for the ugly work. Fella named Reyes, Muscle. He's the one drove out that night. He turned the ring slowly. They picked him up last week. He rolled on Hale inside of a day, told them everything, including the part Hale left out. His jaw tightened. The plan wasn't just to take the ring and frame me later, Olivia. That night on the highway. Reyes wasn't supposed to leave me in a ditch. He looked at her steadily. He was supposed to leave me dead. Make it look like a club dispute, bury the whole chapter in an investigation, then take the land off whoever was left. Olivia went cold. He didn't do it, she said slowly. You're alive. Why didn't he? Ring came off in the struggle, Jackson said. Reyes told him. I fought him. Old as I am, I fought him, and the ring came off my hand somewhere in the dark, and he panicked. Spent 20 minutes looking for it on his hands and knees because he knew if it turned up somewhere, it shouldn't. It pointed back at the plan. Couldn't find it. Headlights coming on the highway. So he ran, left me breathing, left the job half done because he was too scared of that missing ring to finish. Jackson's voice was very quiet. The ring saved my life, Olivia. It fell in the dirt, and it saved my life that night. And then it sat there 8 months. And then you found it. And it saved my life again, the whole club, all of us, the land, the graves. He shook his head slowly. Danny gave me that ring twice. once when he was dying, and once 8 months ago from the grave when it fell off my hand at exactly the right second. They sat in the quiet with her that for a long time. He was looking out for you, Olivia said softly. Your brother. Maybe. Jackson looked at the ring at the small, worn letters of his own name carved inside it 40 years ago by a man long dead. Or maybe it was just luck. Just a ring falling in the dirt. He looked up at her, and something in his weathered face was open in a way it hadn't been the day she met him. But I'll tell you what I've decided to believe. I've decided to believe Danny knew what he was doing when he put that ring in the dirt. Because it didn't just save me, it brought you here. And I think, his voice caught, I think maybe a man doesn't get many second chances at a family. And I lost my brother, and I didn't have anybody after not really 40 years of leather and brothers, and I was still the loneliest man in Nevada. And then a girl walked into my yard and wouldn't keep a ring that wasn't hers. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Olivia reached across the table this time and closed his hand in both of hers. The community center broke ground in the fall. It went up on a different piece of land. The grave stayed protected, untouched, a quiet field with a new stone marker listing all 31 names that the club maintained themselves and always would. But 2 miles down the road on land, the revitalization fund bought fair and clean. The thing Victor Hale had only pretended to build became real. Olivia was there the day they broke ground, standing with the board and clothes that were her own and fit her and hadn't been slept in. She'd learned a lot in a few months. How to read a budget, how to sit in a meeting and disagree without her voice shaking, how to walk into a room full of people who'd never missed a meal and make them really look at what it meant to fall off the cliff. But mostly she'd learned that Jackson had been right. The board was just leather. She was the one wearing it. And she wore it for every woman crying over $4 of baby formula, for every kid deciding which meal they got that week, for every person on every highway watching the ground, because the ground was the only thing that never looked away. Jackson stood at the edge of the crowd that day, apart from the officials and the cameras, his brother's ring on his hand watching her. And when the shovels went into the dirt and the small crowd applauded, Olivia found him in the crowd and held his eyes, and he nodded at her once the same nod he'd given her in the yard the day Hale was taken away. You did this, the nod said, and she nodded back. We did. Victor Hale took a plea deal that winter, rather than face the video in front of a jury. Years, not months. He'd be an old man when he came out if he came out, and the fortune he'd built, stealing from the forgotten, went to lawyers and settlements, and a restitution fund that in the end put even more money into the community center. The last irony, the one Olivia allowed herself to enjoy. He was wrong about her in the end about all of it. She didn't end up back in the ditch by winter. By winter, she had a home and a purpose and a family of outlaws who'd have walked through fire for her, and a name that an entire county remembered. And on her hand, though it would be a while yet before this part came, she'd wear something too. Not a patch, not a skull ring, something smaller. Jackson would give it to her the following spring at the center she'd built in front of the family she'd found, not the way a man gives a ring to a woman he loves. That way, but the way a man gives a ring to a daughter he never had and somehow impossibly got anyway. But that was still to come. For now, there was just the groundbreaking and the shovels in the dirt and a homeless girl who wasn't homeless anymore, standing in the sun, having proved the one thing she'd set out to prove without ever knowing she was proving it. That the smallest honest choice a person can make, the choice to return what isn't yours, to refuse to look away, to keep walking toward the thing that scares you. Because it's right, that choice doesn't just change your own story, it changes everyone's. The spring the ring came was almost the spring it all fell apart again. Because that was the thing about a life rebuilt from nothing. Olivia learned it the hard way. 6 months into the work at the center, a rebuilt thing has cracks, and the cracks run deep. And sometimes the world reaches right into them when you're not looking. It started with a letter. She was at the center that morning early before the doors opened, sorting through the intake files for the transitional housing program, the real one now. The one that actually put roofs over people, 22 families in the first year alone, when the director handed her an envelope with a state seal and a look on her face that Olivia didn't like. This came for the board, the director said. But it's Olivia, it's about you. I think you should read it before the meeting. Olivia opened it, and her stomach dropped the way it hadn't dropped since the day Victor Hale said the word theft in a yard full of bikers. It was a formal complaint, filed with the State Oversight Office. Anonymous but detailed, very detailed. It alleged that a board member of the Community Revitalization Project, one Olivia Bennett, had a criminal record for theft, had misrepresented herself, and was unfit to sit on a board administering public funds. It requested a formal review of her position. It requested her removal. And it requested an audit of every dollar that had passed through her hands. They can't be serious, Olivia said, but her voice had gone thin. The theft thing came out. Everybody knows the story. It was baby formula. They know, the director said gently, but an anonymous complaint triggers an automatic review. It's procedure. They have to look into it. She hesitated. Olivia, somebody filed this on purpose. Somebody who knew exactly which thread to pull. This isn't random. And Olivia sat down slowly, the letter shaking in her hand, and felt the old cold come back. The falling feeling, the ground opening, and she thought with a sick certainty, Hale. Even from prison, even ruin. He told her she'd end up back in the ditch, and here he was reaching out of a cell to dig it for her. She called Jackson. Read it to me, he said. She did. When she finished, there was a long silence on the line. That's not Hale, Jackson said finally. How do you know? Because Hale's got nothing left. No money, no reach, no reason. A man taking a plea deal, watching the clock on 12 years, doesn't waste his last favor filing a complaint about a board seat. That's not vengeance, that's effort, and Hale's past effort. A pause. This is somebody who wants something. Somebody who benefits if you're off that board. Question is who? And Olivia, who had learned in a Hells Angels clubhouse to ask the right question instead of the scared one, went very still. Who benefits if I'm off the board? She repeated slowly. Not who hates me. Who benefits? That's the question. She looked down at the intake file spread across her desk. The Transitional Housing Program. 22 families. Contracts. Contractors. Money moving through a dozen hands, and a board that was supposed to watch every dollar, and one board member in particular who'd made it her whole purpose to make sure the money went where it was promised. One board member who'd been asking a lot of hard questions lately about a contractor whose numbers didn't add up. Jackson, she said, I have to go. I think I know who filed it, and I think I know why. His name was Callahan. He was a general contractor, respectable, established, the kind of man who sat on other boards and shook hands at the Chamber of Commerce and had built half the county's public buildings. He'd won the bid to build the second phase of the housing units, and for 3 months his invoices had bothered Olivia in a way she couldn't quite name until 2 weeks ago when she'd finally sat down with the numbers and named it. He was billing for materials that weren't going into the buildings. Not much. Nothing that would jump out at a banker or a councilman skimming a report. A little here, a little there. Higher grade lumber charged, lower grade lumber used. Fixtures billed at commercial rates, installed at the cheapest the code allowed. Labor hours that didn't match the crew that showed up. Small, clever. The kind of thing you only catch if you've spent a year of your life counting every dollar, because every dollar was the difference between eating and not. She'd flagged it 2 weeks ago, quietly, asked the board to request an itemized reconciliation from Callahan before the next payment went out. And now 2 weeks later, an anonymous complaint had appeared aimed at getting her, the one person asking the questions, removed and discredited before the reconciliation was due. She saw it whole sitting at her desk, and she almost laughed at the ugliness of it. He's doing exactly what Hale did, she thought. He can't answer the questions, so he's attacking the person asking them. Find the ugly thing in her past, hold it up. Make everybody look at that instead. It was the same play. The exact same play. And a year ago it would have worked on her. She'd have been so ashamed, so scared, so certain the world was right about her that she'd have quietly stepped down to make it stop. But she wasn't that person anymore. She called an emergency meeting of the board for that afternoon, and she called Jackson. Bring Dutch, she said, the accountant. I need somebody who can read a contractor's books faster than the contractor can lie about them. You sure about this? Jackson said. You go after a man like Callahan, and you're wrong. It's your seat, your name, everything you've built. I'm not wrong, Olivia said. I've been counting these numbers for 2 weeks. I know what I'm looking at. A breath. And even if it costs me the seat, Jackson, that's not the point. The point is 22 families are supposed to get homes built right and a man is stealing the difference and papering it over with a lie about a girl who bought baby formula. I'm not stepping down. I'm not looking away. I told you, that's the one thing I don't do. There was a silence on the line, and then Jackson Carter said the thing she'd remember for the rest of her life. Danny would have... He started and stopped, and she heard him swallow. You know what? Forget Danny. I'm proud of you. Not what you did with the ring. This. Right now. Choosing the hard thing again when you've finally got something to lose. That's the whole ball game, kid. Any fool can be brave with nothing in their pockets. You've got a home and a name and a future now, and you're putting all of it on the line for 22 families you never met. His voice was rough. That's the realest thing I've ever seen a person do. We'll be there in an hour. The board meeting was the hardest room Olivia had ever walked into. Harder than the clubhouse yard. Harder than Marcia's office. Because in those rooms, she'd had nothing to lose, and here she had everything, and Callahan knew it, and he was ready. He'd come with a lawyer, of course he had, and he'd come with the complaint printed out and copied for every board member. And he opened by expressing his deep, deep concern, not anger concern, the same reasonable warmth Hale had used, that a woman with a documented history of theft was sitting in judgment of honest contractors' invoices. I don't say this to be cruel, Callahan said, spreading his hands. I say it because we have a fiduciary duty. This board administers public money, and it has come to light that one of its members has a criminal record for exactly the kind of dishonesty we're all here to prevent. I think we owe it to the public to pause any actions Mrs. Bennett has recommended, including this reconciliation request she's pushed for until her fitness to serve has been properly reviewed. It was masterful. Olivia had to give him that. He'd wrapped the knife in duty and handed it around the table with a sad smile, and she could see it working, could see two of the board members, the banker and the councilman, shift uncomfortably and avoid her eyes. The old feeling rose up, the falling, the looking away. And then Olivia Bennett stood up, and she did not fall. You're right, she said. Callahan blinked. So did the lawyer. I have a theft charge on my record, Olivia said to the whole room, her voice steady. 11 months ago, I paid $4 out of the register for a mother who couldn't afford baby formula for her kids, and I got fired for it, and it went on my record as theft. That's true. Everybody in this county knows it's true because it was on the front page of the Gazette last fall, right next to the story about how I exposed a man who forged a document about veterans' graves to steal money that was supposed to build the exact housing we're arguing about today. She let that land. So yes, Mr. Callahan, I'm the thief. I'm the woman who gives things away she can't afford and returns things that aren't hers. I'm exactly the person you say I am. Let's put that on the table and leave it there in the open where everybody can see it. See? She turned to the rest of the board. Now let's put something else on the table. She picked up a folder, a manila folder, and she saw Callahan's eyes flick to it and knew he recognized the shape of his own doom. Because here's the thing about my supposedly disqualifying dishonesty. In the 2 weeks since I flagged Mr. Callahan's invoices and asked for a reconciliation, 3 things happened. 1, he did not provide the reconciliation. 2, an anonymous complaint appeared timed perfectly to remove me before that reconciliation is due. And 3, she opened the folder. I kept counting. She slid the pages down the table. That's his materials, orders cross-referenced against the actual site inspections. I did them myself. I walked every unit. I counted every stud, every fixture, every yard of concrete. Her voice was flat and certain. He billed the state for premium grade lumber. The units are built with the cheapest that passes code. He billed for 80-hour crews. The sign-in sheets show 40. He billed for fixtures that cost $400 and installed ones that cost $60. She looked at Callahan. Over 3 months on phase 2 alone, that's roughly $91,000 charged to the publican that did not go into these families' homes. And I can walk any auditor in this state through every dollar of it because I counted it the way I count everything, like it matters. Like it's, the difference between somebody eating and not. The room had gone dead silent. Callahan's lawyer leaned toward him and whispered something urgent. Callahan didn't move. So here's what I think, Mr. Callahan, Olivia said quietly. I think you saw me asking questions you couldn't answer, and you did the exact thing a smarter, richer man tried before you. You reached into my past and you held up the ugliest thing you could find, and you hoped everybody would look at that instead of at your books. She shook her head slowly. But you made the same mistake he did. You looked at my record and you saw a thief. You never once considered that the person who wouldn't keep $4 that weren't hers might be the last person on earth you want counting your money. Dutch, who had been sitting silent at the back with Jackson, spoke up for the first time, dry and calm and devastating. I went through the same numbers this morning, he said. Took me 2 hours. She's not just right. If anything, she's being generous. My count's closer to 104,000. He looked at the board. I've done books for 30 years, and I've never seen a cleaner catch. You've got a fraud sitting at this table, all right. It's just not the woman you were told to look at. Callahan folded faster than Hale had. That was the thing about the small, respectable frauds. They had so much more to lose and so much less stomach for losing it. There was no confession in the yard, no torn suit, no handcuffs in front of a dozen phones. There was just a man in an expensive shirt going gray in the face as his own lawyer physically leaned away from him, and a board voting unanimously to freeze his contract and refer the whole thing to the state, and Callahan gathering his papers with shaking hands and walking out without another word because there wasn't another word to say. The anonymous complaint against Olivia was withdrawn by the state within the week once they understood where it had come from. The reconciliation happened. The $91,104 per Dutch was clawed back and put where it belonged into the homes it was supposed to build. And a new contractor finished phase 2 honest and boring and exactly on budget. And 22 families moved into units built right with premium lumber and $400 fixtures because a woman who'd once slept in a ditch had refused to look away from $100,000 the way the whole world had once refused to look at her. Jackson found her afterward out behind the center where she'd gone to sit alone for a minute and let her hands stop shaking. You keep doing that, he said, lowering himself onto the bench beside her. Doing what? Winning. He said it with a kind of wonder. You keep walking into rooms with nothing but the truth and walking out having taken apart men who've got everything. It's not natural, kid. Most people, that spine gets beaten out of them by your age. Yours just keeps getting straighter. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something I've never told anybody, she said. Always. I'm scared every single time. She looked at her hands. Every room, the yard with Hale, the office with Marsh, that board meeting an hour ago. I'm never brave, Jackson. I'm terrified. My whole body's screaming at me to sit down, shut up, look away, make it stop, every time. She looked up at him. I think people see what I do and they think I'm fearless. And I'm not. I'm the most scared person in every room I walk into. Jackson nodded slowly. You want to know a secret about brave men, he said. 40 years I ran with the toughest men in 3 states. Bikers, brawlers, men who'd been to prison and come out harder. And I'll tell you something I learned about every last one of the real ones. He turned his brother's ring on his finger. Brave was never the ones who weren't scared. The ones who weren't scared were just fools, and fools die young. The brave ones were always the ones who were scared out of their minds and did the thing anyway. He looked at her. You're not fearless, Olivia. Fearless is nothing. You're brave, and there's all the difference in the world between the two, and you're the only person I've ever met who understood it without having to be taught. He gave her the ring that spring. Not the skull ring that stayed on his own hand. Danny's ring, where it belonged, where it would stay, until the day Jackson Carter was buried in the protected ground beside his brother and the 31 soldiers, and even then he'd already decided it would go into the dirt with him or onto Olivia's hand, whichever she chose, and he'd told her so, and she'd cried and hit him and told him to never talk about dying again. The ring he gave her that spring was smaller, plain gold worn thin, and when he put it in her palm at the center in front of the whole strange family, she'd built Rooster and Dutch and the club and the director and the staff and a few of the families from the housing program who'd come to matter to her. She turned it over and found the inside of the band and read what was carved there in small, careful letters. Oh, Bennett. She looked up at him, unable to speak. My brother carved his own name in mine, Jackson said, his voice thick. Day I patched in, so I'd always know where I belonged, who I belonged to. He closed her fingers around it, both his huge scarred hands around her small one, the way he'd done in the yard the first day, the way he'd done 100 times since. I never had a kid of my own, Olivia. Never had anybody to carve a name for. 40 years I told myself that was fine, that the club was enough, that I didn't need it. His eyes were wet, and he didn't try to hide it anymore, hadn't, for a long time. And then a girl walked into my yard with nothing but my dead brother's ring and a spine made of steel, and wouldn't keep what wasn't hers, and I understood that I'd been waiting my whole life for somebody exactly like you and didn't even know it. Olivia put the ring on. It fit like it had always been hers. "It says my name," she whispered, "so I'll always know where I belong." "So you'll always know where you belong," Jackson agreed, "and who you belong to. Whatever room you walk into scared, whatever man you take apart with nothing but the truth, you look down at that and you remember. You've got a family now. You've got ground to stand on. You're not watching the dirt anymore, kid. You own some." And Olivia Bennett, who 11 months before had been a homeless girl with $11 watching the ground beside a dead highway, certain the whole world was right about her worthlessness, put her arms around an old outlaw with a skull on his knuckle and cried into his shoulder. Not the tears of someone who was falling, but the tears of someone who had finally, after a lifetime, landed. The years went by and they were good years, and this is the part of the story that people always want and rarely believe, because we've all been taught that the girl in the ditch stays in the ditch, that the world doesn't hand out second chances, that men like Victor Hale always win, and girls like Olivia always end up back where they started. But this story is true in the way that matters, which is that it teaches a true thing. And the true thing is this: it didn't end the way the world predicted, because Olivia refused to let it. The center grew. It became the beating heart of a town that had been dying exactly the way Hale had claimed his fraud would revitalize it, except real, except honest, except built by the very people it served. Job training that placed people in actual jobs. Housing that stayed affordable because the board with Olivia on it, always on it, eventually chairing it, fought like hell to keep it that way. A food program which Olivia insisted on personally, where anybody could get what they needed, and nobody ever got fired for handing a crying mother $4 of baby formula. She made sure of that. It was written into the charter in her own words. She kept a copy of it framed on her wall right next to the front page of the Gazette. From that first fall, right next to a photograph of 31 names on a stone in a protected field. People started coming to her the way she'd once needed someone to come to her. Kids are aging out of foster care with nowhere to go. Men and women who'd lost homes and hopes standing in front of her desk with the exact look she remembered wearing, the look of someone braced to be looked away from. And Olivia never once looked away. She looked at every single one of them the way Jackson Carter had looked at her in that yard, like they were a person, like they mattered, like the worst thing in their past was the least interesting thing about them. "Why, a young woman asked her once, years in a girl not unlike Olivia had been angry and exhausted and certain the whole thing was a trick. "Why do you do this? What's in it for you? Nobody does something for nothing." And Olivia smiled and turned the plain gold ring on her finger, the one with her name inside it, and gave the only answer she'd ever had, the same answer she'd given in a diner, in a clubhouse yard, in a boardroom. The answer that had never once changed, no matter who asked or why. "Somebody did it for me," she said. "When I had nothing and deserved nothing and expected nothing, somebody looked at me and decided I was worth something. And you don't get given a thing like that and keep it." She met the girl's eyes. "It was never mine to keep. It was only ever mine to pass on." Jackson Carter lived to be an old man, older than anybody in the club thought a life like his had any right to make. He walked Olivia through every hard room she ever had to enter, right up until she stopped needing him to, and then he sat in the back of those rooms and watched her not need him, which he always said was the best feeling a father ever gets. He saw the center double and double again. He saw the girl from the ditch become a woman the whole county called on when they needed someone who wouldn't look away. He saw her hair go from blonde to touched with gray, saw her sit at the head of tables, saw her stand up in rooms full of powerful men and take them apart with nothing but the truth, scared every single time, brave every single time. And when he finally went, he went in the protected ground beside his brother and the 31 soldiers, and Danny's ring went into the dirt with him, because when Olivia was offered the choice, she said no. She wanted him to keep it. She wanted him to have his brother with him wherever he was going. But at the funeral, when the last of the club had said their goodbyes and the yard had gone quiet the way it had gone quiet the first day she walked into it, Olivia Bennett stood at the edge of the grave and did the thing that only she of everyone there fully understood. She reached into her pocket and took out $11, folded soft-creased 100 times. The same $11 she'd had in her pocket the day she found the ring. She'd never spent them, had carried them all these years through every room, a reminder of exactly how far the ground can fall out from under a person and exactly how far a person can climb back. And she knelt at the edge of the grave and she tucked the $11 into the dirt. "You told me to put it down," she said quietly to the man in the ground who'd given her a family and a name and a life. The disappointment, the running, all of it. "You told me the world would still be there when I picked it back up." She pressed the money gently into the earth. "So here it is, the last of it, the last of the girl who watched the ground. I don't need it anymore. You made sure I'd never need it again." Her voice broke and held. "Thank you for not looking away." Then she stood, and she dried her face and she turned back to the family he had left her. Rooster gone gray now himself, Dutch, leaning on a cane, the whole club and the staff and the family's generations of them. By now, everyone whose life had been changed because a homeless girl once refused to keep a ring that wasn't hers. And they went back to work. Because that was the promise, that was the whole promise, the one carved into a ring on her hand and into the charter on her wall and into the ground where 31 soldiers and one old outlaw lay protected forever. Years later, near the end of her own long life, a young reporter came to interview her. The center was famous by then, a model that other towns copied, and people wanted to know how it started. The reporter had heard the legend, the ring, the bikers, the fraud, but she wanted it from the source. And at the end, she asked the question everybody always asked, the one Olivia had been answering her whole life. "You had $11, the reporter said. "You were starving. You'd lost everything. And you found a ring worth a fortune, and you walked 3 days across the desert to give it back to a man everyone said would kill you. I have to ask what everyone asks. Why? Why would you risk everything to return a ring that could have changed your whole life?" And Olivia Bennett, old now and gray and rich in every way that had ever mattered to her, sitting in the center she'd built, surrounded by the family she'd found, smiled the same smile she'd smiled her whole life and gave the answer that had never once changed, the answer that had taken apart powerful men and saved sacred ground and built homes for the forgotten and rescued an old outlaw from 40 years of loneliness, the smallest and truest answer there ever was. "Because it wasn't mine," she said. And the ring that changed everything, a lost Hell's Angels ring found in the dirt beside a dead highway by a girl the world had thrown away, had given that forgotten woman a family, a purpose, and a life she never imagined. But more than that, it had proven the one thing she'd set out to prove without ever knowing she was proving it, that the world is wrong about the people it throws away, that the smallest honest choice can change the biggest story, and that a single person who refuses to look away is stronger than every powerful man who ever bet she'd stay down. Olivia Bennett never went back to the ditch. She spent her whole life pulling other people out of it instead.